Hey folks, got a good one for you today. We're animating from a FAB button into a dialog. That's coming up in this NativeScript tutorial. Hey everybody, it's Alex again from nativescripting.com. Check out the NativeScript courses on nativescripting.com that myself and other NativeScript experts have posted up there for your viewing pleasure and learning. So take your NativeScript skills up a notch to the next level by enrolling in one of the courses there. You can get a discount code down below in the description of this video. And if it's your first time here, consider subscribing to this channel where I regularly post NativeScript tips, tricks, and tutorials just like this one. And make sure you hit the little bell button so you don't miss any of those tutorials that are coming. We got some really good ones coming up. Speaking of tutorials, if you haven't seen the previous one that I just did earlier in the week about creating a simple FAB or floating action button in NativeScript, this goes for iOS and Android, and we're using nothing but the widgets that already come with NativeScript and CSS, no third-party libraries, which is the way I like to do things before I get a third-party library involved. So check out that video first if you haven't seen that already, because we're going to be building on that in this video. There's a link to it down below and in the card up above. So here we're going to be using animation in order to animate from the FAB button that sits in the lower right hand corner of your screen, and it animates to take up the entire screen, and it's a smooth animation. We're going to add a curve to it at the end to make it more natural, and it's using a technique that I've already showed you in a video that I've posted here called NativeScript Animation of Any View Property. I'll link to that video down below also and in the card up above, so check that out. I'll explain every single bit of how we build those animation helper functions that we're going to be using in this video. All right, folks, you ready? Let's begin. Okay, folks, this is what we're building today. We're building on top of the demo that I've created with the FAB button in a previous video. Make sure you check that link out in the description below. Here's the FAB button right here. We've created that just floating, but now we're going to add a function to it that's going to expand it like this. So it's an animation that's going to convert the FAB from the circle to some kind of a pop-up modal dialog like this, where you can have content and a close button. And if you tap the close, it'll collapse again and it'll work on Android and iOS. This is where we left off the project last time. So I'm going to open up mainpage.xml. We're going to be working in that. We're also going to be working in mainpage.ts, and we're going to add some CSS. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run this project in iOS and in Android. So TNS run iOS on one side and TNS run Android in another tab. I'm going to go ahead and kick that off in the background while we're working on this. So I'm going to start off with mainpage.xml. This is the markup. And right now, this is the FAB button right here. This grid layout represents our FAB button. It has the on button tap event. And this is the event that we're going to need to tap into to create our animation. So let's start there. We're handling this event in mainpage.ts, and that's right here. All that's doing right now is just issuing an alert. FAB button tapped. There it is. Well, that's not enough. We don't want it to say that. We actually want it to do the animation. So I'm going to create a separate function called animateFab, and I'm going to call that from here. So I'm going to create this function down here called animateFab. And this is going to use some animations. Now, if you've seen my animation videos here before, you might have seen one on JavaScript animation. That's what we're going to be using here, because we need to animate the height and the width along with some other properties all simultaneously. We need to animate opacity, which the NativeScript API can handle, but we're also going to need to animate the width and the height and the border radius, which NativeScript 6 does promise to handle. However, I'm going to use my animation helpers that I've developed here on this channel. You can check the video on that. I'll include a link to it down below in the description. And the animation helpers will help us synchronize all these animations and animate any property we want in JavaScript. So I'm going to create a new file here, and I'm going to call it animation helpers. We've done this several times before now in the videos here. I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste these functions in here. So this provides an animate function, which is what we're going to use. I explain how we built all this from scratch in that video on JavaScript animations. So check that out if you haven't seen it yet. And we have a couple of interfaces that we're also going to be using here as well. I'm going to save this and close this file out. So the main idea is that we want to animate our FAB button. And in the previous video on creating the FAB button, we got a hold of it right here when the page is navigated to. So we have it right there, but I actually want it to be available in our animation function as well. So I'm going to put it out here outside of the scope of the function so we can use it. So I'm going to create ButtonFab here, and it's going to be a view, and I'm going to instantiate it to null here. Now, when we navigate to this, I want that ButtonFab to be found right here and set to this variable. Okay. I also want to remember a couple other features of where the button is. First, I'm going to need to know where the top of the button is and where the left side of the button is, because it's inside of an absolute layout and it's going to change throughout the animation. I want to remember it. So FAB top, I'm going to initialize it to 0, and FAB left, I'll initialize to 0. And down here, when we navigate to the page, I want to remember those. So FAB top, I'm going to set to ButtonFab.top, and FAB left is going to be ButtonFab.left. Great. Our animation is also going to need to take place during a certain time period. So I want to have that as a constant where I can go up here and change it at any time. So I'm going to set this duration to be, let's go with something slow for now. Let's go with 5,000 milliseconds. We'll speed it up when we're done. But right now, because of the video, and I want you to see all the different nuances of the animation, I'm going to set it to 5,000. And we also need the FAB size because we're going to be changing the size of it dynamically. So I'm going to initialize that to 56. Remember, in the previous video, our button FAB is 56 high and 56 wide. These are dips. It's a circle. So all I need is FAB size, and I know that that's the height and the width. So now I have that in code. All right, let's head down here to animate FAB. And the way our animation function works is we just call the animate function like that. It gets auto imported. Make sure it's imported from the animation helpers. Yes, it is. The first parameter to this is the duration. So that's the duration constant that I've just set. And the second parameter is an array of JS animation definitions. So I'm going to set this as an array, and we're going to need to pass in some animation definitions in here. If you look at animation helpers, these are the JS animation definitions. There's a range, there's a curve, and there's a step. We'll go through this one by one. We need to create a set of animation definitions. I'm going to create one called Ani1. It's going to be a JS animation definition, and this is going to have a curve. And for now, I'll just do a linear curve. So T maps to T, but we'll change that in a bit. This is the animation timing function. All right. And then get range. So this will ask for a function that basically returns us two values, the starting value as a number and the ending value as a number for a given property. All right. So we're going to return an object here from and to. And this returns a range type. And if you look at animation helpers here again, you can see animation range up here. It has a from number and a to number. Right now, I want to animate the top value of the FAB. And our FAB is somewhere down here, somewhere on the page. We don't know where it is. However, we've saved that off to this variable right here, this FAB top variable. So that means we can start from that point. So from FAB top, and we want to go up to 0. So our animation is going to happen right from the top of this button, and it's going to animate it to 0, which is the top of the screen here. Okay. We also need to provide a step function. So this is pretty simple. This will send us the final value of the calculation, and we need to assign button FAB top to that new value. All right. So here's our animation definition. And I just need to pass it to the animate function array, just like that. Pretty simple. Let's check it out. I'm going to tap on this, and you can see that over 5 seconds, our button moves up. Cool. By the way, it changed shape at the end there because it reached the edge. And on iOS, we have safe areas. If a layout is touching an edge, it's going to extend past the safe areas unless you have a different setting set. We don't have to worry about that because that's going to be automatically taken care of for us. All right. So that's moving the top value. Now we need to move the left value. So I'm going to copy this animation definition, paste it here, and call this Ani2. And this is going to move from the FAB left value that we've saved off to 0. And we need to move button FAB left by that value. And I need to include Ani2 in our array here. All right, I'll save that and let's take a look. So when I tap this now, that button moves to that top left corner. All right. Maybe 5 seconds is a little bit too long. Let's make this 3 seconds. What's next? Well, now we need to change the height and the width. So I'm going to copy this animation definition right here. Let's make it any3. You can probably come up with more descriptive names for your definitions. All right, so the range. What's the range going to be? Well, this button is of a certain size, and we've saved that off as a constant, and that's FAB size. So we're going to move from FAB size to the screen height, since we're animating the height here. And how do we get the screen height? Well, we get that from the platform. We can import the screen. Oh, look at that. We're already importing it up here. There it is, of course. So I already imported it earlier in the FAB video, so we can just reuse it here. So we're moving from FAB size to screen.mainScreen.height dips. And the value that we're changing is the height of the button. I'll include any3 here in our array, and let's take a look at that one. So I'm going to tap on this, and you can see that not only does the button move now, but it also changes the size, the height. Cool. There's one more we need to do, and that's, you guessed it, it's width. All right, we'll call this one any4 because we're so creative. And this is going to go from FAB size to mainScreen.width dips, and we're going to change the width. Okay, now before you think you're done with this is looking pretty ugly right now because of the curve, and the curve is not too pretty. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this, and you'll see that it's expanding. It's doing almost what we wanted to do. On iOS, it's looking pretty good. The curve is still pretty bad, but on Android, you'll see that when it animates up, the border radius actually stays the same because we don't have the safe area setting here on Android. So not only do we need to do the height and width, but we also need to animate the border radius. So let's add one more here. I'm going to add any5 here, and we're going to change the FAB border radius, which is going to go from the starting position, and that's FAB size divided by 2, and it's going to go all the way to 0. Let's include any5 here. All right, so let's check that out on Android now. Now it should expand, and the border radius should change dynamically as well. And the same thing happens on iOS. You can see it gradually change there. Now, how do we get it back to its original shape? Well, if I tap on this, all it does is just re-trigger the same animation, but it doesn't go back to the original shape. Well, we'll get there in a second. For now, I want to change that timing function because it's pretty ugly. So I'm going to press Control backtick, and we're going to install a package that I like to use with animations that's going to give us some different curves to use other than linear or our own power function. This is going to give us some pre-written easing functions that we can use that are pretty cool. npm install d3ease, and we're going to save that as a dependency because it's a JavaScript library that we're going to be using during runtime. Now, since we're using TypeScript, I'm going to also install its cousin, npm install at types/d3ease, and I'm going to save this as a dev dependency. All right, that's going to install, and you can check it. It's right there in package.json. There's d3ease and d3ease types. Now we can just start using it. So I'm going to go up here and import star as d3 from d3ease. All right, now instead of these linear functions that are pretty boring for the curves, I'm going to use one called easeexp in out. So it's an exponential easing, and it goes in and out gradually. So it's going to start out real slow, speed up in the middle, and then slow down towards the end. And I'm going to use the same function for all my curves. There we go. You don't have to use the same function. You can change the easing functions for every animation definition, but I'm just going to use the same one. So I've changed that, and let's take a look at that now. So I'm going to tap on this button, and you can see that it slowly and gradually speeds up and then kind of snaps in the middle and then slows down to the end. I really like the way that looks. It's way better than the linear function. You can take a look at that one more time. There we go. So we need two more things here. First, we need a way to close up this modal dialog that pops up. And second, we need some content in the modal dialog. So I'm going to go backwards here. Let's add some content here. So this is our button right here, and this is what we're animating. It's a grid layout, so I'm actually going to include the content of the modal dialog right in here. So I'm going to create another grid layout inside for our content, and I'm going to call this one modal. I'm going to give it the ID of modal here. Now, just so that we can tell what it is, I'm going to give it a label with the text of dialog, and this label is going to be 100% wide. I'm getting a little lazy here with my styling. I should probably include all this styling inside my CSS, but I'm going to just include it as attributes inside here. And let's give it a larger font size. So let's say 40. There we go. There's our label. And that's the top banner, let's call it. And then we can have maybe a stack layout that contains other elements. So I'm going to have a stack layout here, and let's say we have a label with some text in it. This is the content, and let's make this a little bit longer. So I'm going to do that. Just type in some random stuff, and let's do text wrap, which is going to make that wrap around. I'm going to set that to true. Let's have an equal sign there after text. This label is going to be in the top, and this stack layout is going to be the main content. We need to somehow separate that out, and we do that with rows. So we have a grid layout here. We can set the top row to be auto because our label has a height of 60 already. So this is going to be 60 automatically. And the second row can just be star. That's for the main content or the stack layout. And of course, we need to put the stack layout in row 1. There we go. Now we also need a little button to close this dialog. Well, let's take a look at it first. So I'm gonna go ahead, and you can see that it's already showing in there in our FAB, and that doesn't look so good. We're gonna fix that, don't worry. But if I tap on this, you can see that this expands, and we still have our plus there, which we need to get rid of, and we have that dialog. In fact, let's push it in a little bit. On our modal, I'm gonna add some padding of 20. All right, so there we go. That's gonna animate, and that looks a little bit better. So over here on the right side, next to the dialog text, I want to have an X so I can tap on it and then close the dialog. And so I'm going to create another label for that, and this is going to have a class. Let's give it a label close class, and I'm going to put this in column 1. So we need some columns on our grid layout here. Let's define columns, and the first column is going to take up most of the space, and the second one is going to be 60, so that we have a little square there in the corner for that label. We need an X there for that label, and we need to provide that style. And you've seen me use this tool before. It's called Clippy. I really like this tool. They already have an X here. It's just going to give me this clip path polygon, and it's going to give me this X. I'm going to copy that clip path right there. All right, let's head over to our CSS. Remember, we need to style this label right here. This has label close class. So we already have a label plus class. I'm going to have a label close class right next to it here, and I'm going to define it as that clip path that I just copied. Of course, we need the background to be white as well, so I'm going to copy that and paste it right there. All right, let's check that out. Whoa, we need to have a size. So let's do height of 16 and width of 16 as well for that one. Okay, there it is. That looks better. So there's our close button. All right, so you can create a tab handler on that close button separately, but I'm just going to do something else here. When I tap on the FAB, I'm going to detect that tab with this on button tap, and I'm just going to reuse that function, but I'm going to play the animation in reverse in order to close our dialog. How do I play the animation in reverse? Well, in the code behind here, I'm going to create a variable here. I'm going to call it rev, and I'm going to set it to false initially. And when I play the animation right here on button tap, I want to send in that rev variable. And then right after it's done, I want to set rev equal to not rev. So I'm going to toggle rev. So it's going to be false after that button is tapped initially. All right, that means that animate fab needs to take in our rev, which is going to be a Boolean. And now we need to do a few things here with that rev variable. For example, here's our animation definition, the first one. This is going from fab top to 0. But when we reverse the animation, we want it to go from 0 to that fab top value. And we want to do this for every one of these animation definitions. So I'm going to create a reusable function here that takes care of that for us. And I'm going to call it order range. And it's going to take in that range, which is a animation range. And it's going to take in our rev value, which is a Boolean, and it's going to return a new animation range that basically just reverses the initial one. So I'm going to return this object, and inside here, we're going to have a from value, and it's going to check rev. If rev is true, we're going to say range to, otherwise we're going to say range from. So we're basically going to flip it. And then the to property is going to check rev again and say range from or range.to. So there's order range. Now we need to use order range right here. So what I can do is just say order range, and I can pass in this range right here, and then also pass in our rev variable. So depending on rev, this will give us the proper range. I'm just going to do the same thing for the rest of these. So I'm going to do order range here and here, here. Copying and pasting this is pretty easy. And then at the end, I'm just going to pass in that rev variable. Oh, got to be careful over here on these lines. And there we go. So this is automatically going to reverse it for us. Let's go take a look. I'm going to tap on this and it's going to expand. And when I tap on it again, it's going to go ahead and collapse. Cool. We still have some weirdness going on with these content of the dialog and this plus button. We need to somehow take care of that. So we're going to do that by adding some more animations to our animation helper. Now we're just going to animate opacity. You can do that with the standard NativeScript animation APIs, but we already have this animation helpers that we're using, so might as well just add more to that same animation loop. So our grid layout for the modal already has an ID, but our plus button doesn't have one yet. We need to get a hold of that in code as well. So I'm going to call this one FAB plus, and let's go back to the code. And when we navigate to our page, I want to find FAB plus and I want to find the modal dialog, and I need to store them somewhere as views up here. So I'm going to create a variable called FAB plus. It's going to be a view, and I'm going to initialize that to null. And I'm also going to create a modal here, which is also going to be a view initialized to null. All right. Let's head down here. So FAB plus, I'm going to get that from the page, page.getViewById, FAB plus, and we're going to cast that as a view. You've seen me do this before. So modal is going to have the same exact idea, page getViewById, but we're going to get the view called modal as a view. And when we first start out, our modal is collapsed, so we want to hide that. So I'm going to say modal.opacity. I'm going to set that to 0 right off the bat. Now, let's go down here to where we're animating, and we're going to add a couple more animations. So I'm going to copy this last one and paste it here and call this one Ani6. Now we want to animate the opacity. First, we're going to animate the opacity of that plus symbol, and that's called FAB plus. And we want to change its opacity. And the range that we're going to go to is from 1, because it's initially visible, down to 0 when it's hidden. And there's one more we need to do. Ani7 is going to do the same thing to modal, but in reverse. So the modal is going to go from 0 to 1. Don't forget to add these two animation definitions to our array here. So Ani6 and Ani7. Okay, I'm going to save everything and let's take a look. I'm going to tap on this and the animation is going to take place. The plus disappears, the dialog appears, and everybody's happy. I'm going to tap on the X here and the dialog collapses. All right, same thing with Android. The Android works pretty much the same way. My emulator is a little bit choppy. I don't know if you can tell that from the video, but that shouldn't be the case in a real device. And our list is still scrollable. I do want to speed this up a little bit. It shouldn't take that long for the animation. So I'm going to set this to 600 milliseconds, and that should be a more realistic kind of animation for our FAB. And there we go. Pretty cool. Now you just saw this technique being used for numerical animation values, but I've created an extension for this method to animate colors. This will allow us to animate foreground colors like text colors, and that animation tutorial is actually coming up. I've already recorded it. It's coming up shortly, so make sure you subscribe to this channel to get an update about that. Click the little bell so you get the notification. And you can also follow me on Twitter. I'm at Digitalix over there, where I randomly post about NativeScript stuff in Angular and Vue and JavaScript. And now it's time for your comments. This is kind of a new segment I have here where I read some of your comments and respond to them right here. So recently I've posted a video about async await in NativeScript, and this is the update. I'll link to that down below. This is the more recent async await video that I've posted up. Richard Vink says, honestly, I never know that async await can be this simple. Thank you, Alex. Thank you again, Richard, for your comment. I really appreciate that. It is pretty simple, especially now in NativeScript, to use async await, and I hope more people discover it because it's really useful and it makes your code really clean. Gabriel Soares says, what about videos explaining service plugin development in depth? I think what you mean is plugin development in general. Yes, that is a topic that's pretty huge. The instructions on how to create your own plugins on the NativeScript website are getting better. They're not fully complete yet. In my opinion, they could use a little bit more work. There's different kinds of plugins you can create. There's Vue plugins, and there's a course by Nathan Walker on nativescripting.com on how to create those kinds of plugins. There's also other types of plugins you can make, plugins that interact with the devices. And I think that's what you mean here is service plugins. Well, I don't have a course on that just yet. That may be coming soon, I don't know yet. But a simple video on that is going to be not enough, I'm afraid. It's going to require quite a bit to explain how to develop those kinds of plugins. But where I would start is the documentation. It's getting much better now, so if you have any questions about how to follow that documentation, definitely hit me up on Twitter. By the way, on Twitter, I'm at Digitalix over there. Feel free to tweet me and DM me if you need to. And Watchline Productions says, you helped me out. Awesome. Thank you, Watchline Productions. I'm glad that this video helped you. And I will see you all in the next video tutorial. Bye.